We're going to look at quadratic functions. Now, the name given to the shape of a quadratic function is a parabola. It's kind of a U shape. Now, there's different versions of the quadratic function. It could be written in standard form, so no parentheses. So A is what's in front of your squared term, B is what's in front of your term to the first power, C is the one that's all by itself. And we are somewhat familiar with that from using the quadratic formula. So if you did want to find your zeros, you'd want to use your quadratic formula. Once again, your zeros are when your y value is 0, so b0 equals this. Now, if you're looking for your vertex, though, the easiest way to get to your vertex when it's in the standard form is to go the opposite of b over 2 times a. That's your x-coordinate. If you know what x is, all you have to do is plug it in to find your y. And well, that really means, or what we're doing here, is it just says to find your y, take your value of x, plug it into your function. That's how you'd find your vertex there. This one here, if you're trying to find your zeros, that's where your y is 0. I'd try to get the squared term by itself by getting rid of the k and getting rid of the a, and then just take the square root of both sides and finish solving it from there. This form is nice because it's your vertex form, which means the opposite of h, or opposite of what's in the parentheses after x, is your x-coordinate, and the same as what's on the outside. So that's how you find your vertex when it's in the vertex form. Sometimes you'll be having problems where it's already factored for you. And if you're looking for your zeros, that's when your y is 0. Really, you just have to set each one of these equal to 0. And if you set this equal to 0, you get x of 2. You set this equal to 0, you get x of 1. Your vertex is really halfway in between. It's the average of where your two zeros are. So your average, you'd have to add them together, divide by 2. But this is your x. If you know what x is, all you have to do is plug it in. And this function notation means that all you're doing is taking your input, which is this, your x, and plugging it in. Now, if your parabola is opening up, and we know our parabola is opening up if our a value is positive. If you're opening up, you then have a bottom point, which is a minimum. If your a value is negative, your parabola opens down, and you have a top point, so you have a maximum. Now, your max or min will always occur at your vertex. The y value of your vertex is what your max or min is. Occasionally, you'll be asked to find when your max or min occurs, and that's your x-coordinate. So let's start out with this one. It's in standard form, but let's go ahead and get it into the vertex form. To do that, we'd have to complete the square. Remember, in completing the square, you only want to have a 1 in front of your squared term. So I'm going to take a negative 4 out of my x's, and I'm only taking it out of the x's because I'm completing the square with my x's. Now, to complete the square, I want to take half of b and square it. So I'm going to take half of b, half of that is 2, and I'm going to square it. That's what I'm going to add here. So if I add it here and I stay on the same side of the equal sign, then I need to subtract it here. But notice, this blue 2 squared here is in parentheses all multiplied by this green negative 4. So I need to subtract the green negative 4 times my blue squared. Now in completing the square, remember what's in your parentheses after you completed the square factors in the 2 identical parentheses. What's being squared here is x. You take the first sign and you ask yourself what's being squared here, which is a 2, all squared. And then you work out the outside here. This is a 4 times a 4. You'd be subtracting a negative, so it's adding, so we get plus 3. Your vertex is the opposite of what's after the x, and the same as what's on the outside. Now, Does it have a max or min? Well, we know we have a negative in front, so we have a parabola that's opening down, so it would have a top point or a maximum. What is that maximum? That's just the y value of your vertex, which in this case is 3. But when does that occur? Well, that's just the x-coordinate of your vertex, which is 2. Now, we want to go ahead and find our zeros. And we're going to do that in two ways. Your zeros is when you set it equal to 0. Well, I would say the easiest way to do this one is to do the quadratic formula. Your a is what's in front of your squared term, your b is what's in front of your term to the first power, and your c is the term that's all by itself. Plug it into your quadratic formula, simplify what's in your root, and you get 48. Now the square root of 48 does simplify, because 48 is 16 times a 3. So we pull out the square root of 16, which is 4. We could either factor a 4 out of the top and factor a 4 out of the bottom, or you could write it as two separate fractions, the negative 16 over negative 8, and the 4 root 3 over the negative 8. Wouldn't make a difference. In this case, if we do it as two separate fractions, we get a 2 here. Here we would then get a root 3 over 2. Notice there's no negative on the bottom, because if this was plus and you were adding a negative, that's subtraction, and so that's our negative sign. If this was a negative and you were subtracting a negative fraction, that's adding, so that's your plus sign. So this is your answer. Now that's one way to do it. A second way to do it is from your vertex form, which we had done over here. So set that vertex form equal to 0. Well, then all you'd have to do is subtract your 3, get rid of what's in front of your squared term. Then all you'd have to do is take the square root of both sides. If we do the square root of both sides, we get this. Remember, plus or minus whenever you take the square root. And take the square root of the top over the square root of the bottom, and then finish getting x by itself by adding 2. Notice you get the exact same answer either way. Now, here you're given a parabola. You're told its vertex, and you're told the y-intercept. So if I'm asked to find the equation of my parabola, and I'm given a vertex, I would probably start with my vertex form, because there's three things you don't know, whether it's the standard form, which would be a, b, and c, or a vertex form, your a, your h, and your k. If I use the vertex form, I already know my vertex, which is two of the three things I don't know. So I could go ahead and plug in my h, which is the x-coordinate of my vertex, which is 4, plug in my k, which is negative 7. Now I could go ahead and look at my y-intercept, my x-intercept, which is just 4 units to the left on the x-axis. So it's negative 4, comma 0. This is an x and a y, so I can take my x and plug it in, take my y and plug it in, and then I can now work it out and solve it for a. So I work out the parentheses. Negative 8 squared is 64, so it's 64 times a. Now I can finish getting a by itself by adding 7 and dividing by 64. So now I want to go ahead and rewrite this one right here and plug in my value of a. And so I would get this.